If you feel like you can never come up with the right story ideas for your social media, for your next presentation or keynote address, or for that book that you've been working on off and on for years, then you're going to love today's episode because it's going to help you start to unlock your inner storyteller. So, this episode is a little bit different than others I've done because it's actually a sample from my book, Start with Story, which I recently released the audiobook version of. And since I've been struggling with a bit of sickness recently and my throat is not up to the task, I decided, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to give you a little bit of a preview of what my book is like. And so the rest of this episode is a sample from chapter 5, which talks about the 5 story types. And in this episode, we're going to cover 3 of those story types. So let's dive right in and start unleashing your inner storyteller by helping you find these story types in your own life. I've always loved storytelling, even when it meant finding an unusual way to package a story. For part of my elementary education, my mom was also my teacher. I homeschooled from kindergarten through 2nd grade, and then again in 5th grade, which explains at least some of my social awkwardness, though not all. Most of it is God-given natural talent. A few years ago, she was going through old school stuff because, well, she's a bit of a pack rat. Or to put it more nicely, a nostalgia nerd. While excavating, she sent me a picture of an old assignment from my homeschool days. Apparently, I was supposed to write an example of a thank you note. Here's what I wrote. Dear Grandma, thank you so much for sending me a cat for my birthday. I named her Fluffy because of how fluffy she is. I love sitting with her and petting her soft fur. But next time, will you please remember to first put holes in the box? Love, Jonathan. Apologies if I lost the cat lovers with this story, but rest assured, no real cats were harmed in the making of this school assignment. Naturally, I wanted to tease my mom, as most little boys are inclined to do. My mom is a lifelong cat lady herself, which is the exact reason I chose this story for the assignment. I was going for shock value and succeeded, all thanks to using story in the form of a school assignment. In high school, I doubled down on this approach. My senior English teacher would assign us papers where we had to use each week's vocabulary list. Most of my classmates wrote their papers about their family or favorite activities, awkwardly squeezing in the necessary words. What did I do instead? I wrote an entire fantasy novella to span the whole semester's worth of vocabulary lessons. Why? Because I liked my English teacher, who was also my theater director. I felt she was probably tired of the same old, so I wrote what I thought would provide her with some mild entertainment. Before we discuss the 5 story types the chapter title has promised, you must continue to keep your reader in mind. What story type you pick can't be arbitrary. It has to be rooted in the reader experience you want to create. I wanted to shock my mom and entertain my English teacher. For both assignments, I knew my audience, which informed the story I wrote, crafting the appropriate reader experience. Thankfully, to create transformational reader experiences, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Oh, sorry. There's more than one way to tell a story. And since I just used 2 personal anecdotes, how about we start there? Story type 1, personal anecdote. Personal anecdotes may be the most popular story type because they're so flexible. You see them in books, in sermons, in keynote speeches. Even characters in movies will share personal anecdotes to fill in their backstories. Anecdotes are everywhere. And if I could afford it, I would insert the Psycho theme music right here to give it a little bit of a spooky vibe, but we're just going to move on. Now, personal anecdotes are a natural fit for fulfilling the why of entertain. They build engagement and rapport right away. Not to say all anecdotes are equally entertaining. When you're telling your own story, you're often too close to the events to be objective. You need to let others provide the objectivity to see if the story works or not. When deciding which of your own personal stories to share, the key is to pay attention to three factors. One, what life stories do you share on a regular basis? If you have a go to story, then there's a good chance it aligns with your personal values, your brand, or both. So put it on the page. Two, how do people respond to those stories? If your go to stories generally receive a positive response, those are likely key personal anecdotes to rely on. Yet, there is one more factor we shouldn't ignore. Three, does the story teach something of value? Granted, sometimes a story exists just for the sake of the story, for sheer enjoyment. Not every story in life needs a point. But when you're writing a nonfiction book, every word is valuable real estate on the page. Writing a book is like renovating a loft in New York City, not like building a sprawling estate on a Texas ranch. Books are finite, so you have to be efficient with how the space is used. You could say the same for a speech. You only have an allotted amount of time. You have to be efficient with your word real estate. Being aware of the space restrictions means you need to filter for the stories which clearly fulfill the three whys: entertain, educate, or empathize. In business nonfiction, the educate piece sometimes needs to be the deciding factor when you're assessing stories to use. Sometimes clients will share a fun story with me, and I'll say, "That's a great story." Then I sometimes follow it up with a big but I'm not sure it's right for this book or the lesson you're trying to convey. Be efficient with the anecdotes you use in your book. Make sure they have a point. Save the others for conversations. Once you search for personal anecdotes in your own life, you'll see them all around you. But for a jump start, let's explore some natural places to look. Childhood memories, especially if it ends with you getting in trouble. Romantic relationships, so long as your significant other is cool with it. Family, including sibling rivalry, parenting, weird traditions, or vacations gone awry. Hobbies or clubs, the weirder, the better. Volunteering, especially if it was court ordered community service. School memories, the more embarrassing, the better. Workplaces, especially pranks. Pets, especially dogs or chinchillas. All of these are rich areas to mine for personal anecdotes. But how do you check if the story is relatable? Is it possible to use a personal anecdote that isolates your reader? Yes, yes, it is. One time, a copy editor I know told me about a book he was working on. In it, the author shared a long, extended anecdote about an experience in another country. He did this several times in the book, but one was particularly egregious in how elitist it made the author sound, along with a heavy dose of arrogance. The real kicker was how the story's connection to the chapter's lesson, quote unquote, was flimsy at best, egotistical and narcissistic at worst. But my friend was only being paid to copy edit the book, not to give his opinion on the storytelling. So he trudged on, correcting grammar and spelling. Certainly, this is exactly why having a book coach or a developmental editor for your project will save you from potential embarrassment. They become the extra set of eyes you need for an external reader perspective, your breathing story filter. From what my friend shared, I sensed the author had skipped this particular step. So while he wasn't trying to come across as a total tool, the choice of story certainly gave this impression. Either no one challenged him on it, or if they did, he ignored their advice. To make sure you're choosing anecdotes that build rapport rather than repel your audience, here's some questions to ask yourself. Will this story resonate with my audience? For instance, if you know you're writing or speaking to a group of college kids, will an anecdote from marriage or parenting have enough riz for them? Maybe, but context matters. Will this story endear me to my audience? Consider whether the anecdote shows you as a relatable, empathetic human. Thoughtfully examine if the story could estrange you from your audience, or worse, come across as boastful, demeaning, or condescending. Will this story allow me to teach a valuable insight or express a common pain point? As discussed before, anecdotes should have a point to them, and it's okay if the point isn't super obvious at first, like my own opening anecdote for this chapter. But if you're going to lead a horse to water, then make sure you have good water. Horses work hard, they deserve it. When you are able to tie the anecdote to the theme of your book, even better. This requires some real thought, though, because you never want the theme or lesson to feel like it was forced in. Audiences will pick up on that BS from a mile away. If you want to keep your audience engaged, then you have to be hyper focused on their experience. You need to understand why they picked up your book in the first place, because they have a problem. Story type 2, problem solution. You could say most stories are problem solution stories on some level, even in fiction. For instance, The Lord of the Rings. Problem? This ring is legit evil, guys. Solution? Yo, let's drop it into this evil volcano. Pride and Prejudice. Problem? I don't like that guy. Solution? Let's get married. In nonfiction storytelling, problem solution stories provide such a practical framework, they're often the easiest place to start. If you know your audience's underlying problem, then problem solution stories not only build rapport with your audience, but they allow you to show them your expertise without having to brag. They don't have to be huge problems/solutions either. They just need to be relatable. When starting a new ghostwriting gig for a publisher in 2020, I realized I would need to take really good notes. Even though the calls were recorded, I didn't want to over rely on the recording in case of a tech glitch. Looking at you, Zoom. On my first few projects with the publisher, I took notes by hand in a notebook. Handwriting was the first idea to pop in my head because this was standard practice for me while growing up, taking notes in class, in church, and for my own story ideas. The age before mobile devices was wild, wasn't it? But I encountered several problems with my archaic method. First, I couldn't write as fast as my clients could speak, so I was scribbling keywords out of context and then having to look them up in the transcript later. Sometimes it looked like I wasn't paying attention on the call because my eyes were constantly directed down at the page instead of up at my client's face. A few times I scheduled calls to take place while I was on my lunch break or at a coffee shop and left my notebook behind at home. Oops. As my family will vouch, my handwriting has not progressed much beyond third grade. Even I struggle to understand my own scribbles. So, as you can imagine, this does nothing to speed up the process of writing. And finally, hand cramps. One day, though, I left my notebook behind, and when I was forced to improvise, the solution slapped me in the face. The answer was so easy, so simple, so obvious. All I needed to do was open my word processor and take notes on a new document dedicated to my client's calls. Then I could easily search and find keywords without having to flip through pages and decipher my chicken scratch. This one change provided multiple solutions to my problems. I could keep my eyes on the client more often. I type way faster than what I can handwrite. By saving the doc on the cloud, I couldn't leave it behind, and no more translating my impossible handwriting. Such a ridiculously easy solution. At minimum, I've doubled my output because I'm no longer doubling the amount of work it takes to write. The new method freed me from having to retype my notes, then search through a transcript, and then finally construct a coherent sentence on the page. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone about this solution because, well, I was embarrassed. I assumed I'm probably the one idiot ghostwriter who used notebooks instead of using a digital file. But when I finally started sharing my process openly, I was amazed at how many others had faced the same problem. Many nonfiction books are centered on common, relatable problems. Newer authors sometimes worry about whether they will give away too much of their knowledge in a book. This fear leads them to only talk about the problems, yet offer up no solutions. But if you're going to build trust with your audience and gain them as clients, then you better offer up some solutions too. Because let's face it, solutions often need to be tailored to the individual with the problem. While some people will figure it out on their own, your ideal prospect is likely someone who wants assistance tailoring a solution to their problem. In other words, you've got nothing to lose by sharing problem solution stories. They are the best proof you can offer to show you can follow through. Consider some of the following prompts. One time I had a client who came to me with problem X. Here's what we did for them. Dot dot dot. Have you ever had X happen to you? When it happened to client Z, we dot dot dot. One day I received the email I hoped I'd never get. Here's what we did next. The formula for problem solution stories is painfully easy to follow. 1. Introduce the problem. 2. If necessary, explain why the problem is a problem. This may be necessary if your service solves a problem that people don't realize they have. 3. Explain any steps taken to address the problem. You might even include any steps that didn't work to show your perseverance and willingness to iterate. 4. Present the solution. Do this through a story, just in case that's not already obvious. And 5. Show the outcome. Provide some explanation of how the solution made life better for the problem haver. One of my clients followed this exact formula in almost every chapter of her book. In fact, she supercharged the concept by showing 3 different manifestations of each problem and then 3 different solutions. This solidified her as an expert without having to say, "Hey, I'm an expert." She showed with clear examples how she helped people solve common problems. So now her book can help her land high-paying clients facing similar problems. An important caveat here is that problem solution stories work best when they come from firsthand experience. While you could borrow a problem solution story from someone else, you need to make sure you give them credit for it and show how you applied it for yourself. Otherwise, you're not developing the necessary credibility with your audience. But what if you don't have a firsthand experience to share? What if there is some other powerful example you want to use? Story type 3, case study. Simon Sinek starts his book, The Infinite Game, talking about the Vietnam War and how key U.S. officials knew back in the early 60s they had entered an unwinnable war. While Sinek was born during the Vietnam War, he was a toddler when it ended, so I'm pretty sure he neither had firsthand experience in battle, nor was he in any official military strategy role. In the same book, he also shares the story of George Eastman, who founded the photography company Kodak in 1888, well before Sinek's time. He does so to illustrate how the company moved away from Eastman's original purpose for the company, and eventually suffered for it. Since Sinek didn't have first-hand experience, why does he include these stories? Well, you've probably already guessed why. Because they are powerful case studies. In their own ways, each story supports his thesis that business is an infinite game, not a finite one. Technically, both personal anecdotes and problem solution stories are also case studies, but they focus solely on the firsthand experience. And firsthand accounts sometimes lead to some really annoying objections, such as, sure, but how do you know it will work for anyone else? So you say, but where's the proof? How can I know this idea works in my industry, in my business? Okay, while those might be annoying objections when you hear them, they are legitimate. Maybe you've made the same objections when the tables were turned, which is why you shouldn't limit your content to firsthand stories. Case studies are powerful because they are not exclusively firsthand. Like so much of life, there is no one size fits all solution. Case studies allow you to provide proof of a common framework that generally works, or at least one that is adaptable. Case studies allow you to borrow someone else's experience to show how your idea or expertise works for others. Backed up by research, it bolsters your claims. You're no longer shouting, just trust me, okay? Now you're saying, don't just trust me, trust the evidence, while waving your hand across the proof like you're a glitzy model from The Price is Right. The Bob Barker era, of course. You could use two distinct types of case study stories in your book. One, extended. Two, examples. Full-fledged extended case studies are stories that take up more space on the page and often require some supporting research. They may not be stories everyone is familiar with, so you may need to provide some context to connect the case study back to your message. One of my book coaching clients was able to provide a full-fledged problem solution story for every single chapter except the conclusion of his book. The well had run dry on ideas, and he was at a loss. While going through my notes to brainstorm some ideas, I landed on the perfect case study, the story of the English Navy defeating the Spanish Armada. The author was a lover of history and had already devoted an entire chapter to historical concepts. So not only did the story fit the message of the book, it was consistent with his voice and personality. He used the conflict between England and Spain as an engaging case study to tee up his call to action. Meanwhile, the details of the battle were used as creative callbacks for the lessons throughout the book. In total, the story took up the entire first page of his book's conclusion. Examples, on the other hand, are one-offs, usually taking up no more than a paragraph. These are more relatable, down to earth, and universal in nature. Typically, they do not need supporting research and evidence to hold true or make your point. They sound something like, for example, walking your dog without taking along a poop bag shows a fundamental lack of foresight. For instance, you don't hand wash dishes after running them in the dishwasher. If you do, then either you need to schedule an appointment with your therapist or you need to schedule an appointment with a plumber. Hanging out with toxic friends is like guzzling a gallon of milk when you know you're lactose intolerant. The only person you're hurting is yourself. In nonfiction, full-fledged case studies and short examples both serve a purpose in adding variety to your storytelling. Too many short examples stacked together is like offering a dinner guest nothing but a bowl of jelly beans. And only offering up full-fledged case studies is like dropping a whole side of beef on their plate. Using both in good measure creates a more balanced diet for your audience's experience. All right, I hope you enjoyed this sample from Start with Story, how great storytellers transform ideas into impact. If you really love print books, you can obviously grab a copy on Amazon. I've got the link down in the description of the video. Or if you have an Audible credit that is burning a hole in your digital pocket, you can hop on Audible and grab the entire audiobook, which, by the way, the audiobook has some bonus stories in it that the print version does not have. So just saying, you might want to check it out. And if you haven't done so already, make sure that you hit follow and subscribe so you don't miss a single video here. And in the meantime, keep sharing your story and move your writing forward.